You are watching the Remnant Radio, a crowd-funded show where we interview pastors, teachers, historians, and theologians from different churches and denominations. My name is Joshua Lewis, and this is my co-host, Michael Roundtree. Together, we want to help you break outside of your theological echo chambers. If you're interested in learning about history, theology, or the gifts of the Spirit, this is the show for you. Hey, everybody, we have a great program for you today, but before I dive into the show, and have Michael Miller introduce our guests for this program, I want to let you know there's so much stuff going on at Remnant Radio. And if you want to stay up to date on all the things that are happening, you need to subscribe to the newsletter. There's a link in the description of this video, or you can do that at theremnantradio.com. One of the things you would know about if you were on that newsletter would be the new Remnant Conference that's coming up this October 3rd through the 5th in Houston, Texas. Check out this quick promo. The Word and the Spirit were given to you as inheritance. Jesus has given us riches and glory in the Word, and He's given us direction and guidance through the work of the Spirit. And I'm just not satisfied letting biblical illiteracy determine how the charismatic movement's going to operate, and I'm not going to let the liberalness of the use of those gifts prevent us from pursuing them anymore.
What God is doing in the last days is He's pouring out His Spirit on all flesh, which by and large means that the people of God will be marked by the Spirit of God, which results in prophecy.
God doesn't call on us just to think about the nature of His power or to envision it as an idea only. His desire is that we avail ourselves of it to partner with Him in His purposes on the earth. His desire is that we cry out to Him that He might intensify and expand and increase and deepen the manifestation of this power through us in even more demonstrable ways in our lives.
Guys, we've got a great conference for you October 3rd through the 5th in Houston, Texas. Seats are going fast, so make sure to register over at theremnantradio.com. Without further ado, I want to get you back to your normal programming.
Welcome to Remnant Radio. Hey, you guys, we've got several guests on the show today. We've got Elizabeth Herder, Shari Hall, and Jen Roberts. Jen, do you prefer going by Jennifer or Jen? I've got you in my contact as Jen. Okay. Well, we have done a couple of episodes now on stuff with IHOP, but all of you have an aspect of this overall narrative that we felt like was going to be important and helpful for our audience and those who've been affected by the IHOP story. And so we wanted to do just a part two to all of this that we've done on the Remnant Radio. And so one of the other things is, we did the prophetic history of Kansas City. I know that a lot of people were angry with us for taking that series down, saying the guys from Remnant Radio are unwilling to be held accountable. And actually, it's just the opposite. We want to be held accountable for everything. If we platformed somebody and didn't realize that they were massively abusive, we want to come out and say, we messed up big time. And so interviewing you all is a way that we can do that. It's a way we can say, there is more to this story. We did not know this. And in fact, we think that prophetic history was used to groom people and manipulate and control and get them to buy into this vision and sacrifice a whole lot. And you three have sacrificed a ton for that organization and then paid dearly when you expose some of the abuses of that organization. So that's where we're at, and that's why we're here. Perhaps each of you could give a quick history, and I know that's hard to do, but just your introduction. How did you each get involved with IHOP?
You wanna?
Like to
start with Jennifer.
Yeah, we came to Kansas City August 98. We had been with Youth of the Mission for 10 years before that. And so we landed in Kansas City just to kind of go to Bible school. Sam Storms had a Bible school at the time. And our goal was to kind of regroup and then go back out on the mission field as church planters. And Mike started talking about the house of prayer, and we got gripped by the message. And so we jumped in right away. We have the official title of the first staff members because we already had our missionary support. And so the pioneering days were pioneering. It was all hands on deck. We had one child at the time, so I was able to be more involved. My husband kind of pioneered the One Thing conference, and he was over everything except the university at one point. And so we had a lot of different hats. I spoke at most conferences and our schools and internships. So we were on staff officially for 14 years before we moved to Brazil to plant something similar, but we had already made some adjustments in leadership style and messaging by the time we moved down there.
Wow. All right, Shari, tell us about your history there as well. How did you and Jono get involved?
So I actually met my husband at IHOP, but I originally came, I was just in a season of life where I was working a secular job and really just feeling a pull of like, how am I spending my time? Am I really influencing people's lives in the way I want to? Do I feel like what I'm spending my time doing is going to count in the long run? So, I had been tracking with some of the House of Prayer messaging, as well as some of the teachings that Mike Bickle had.
What year was that?
I first went, I did not actually plan to intentionally go to IHOP. I went to the One Thing conference it would have been December of 2004. And I was just going to go to the conference, but I was working in the television industry at the time in Philadelphia, and I had a bit of a sabbatical between filming of the show I was working on. So I had a bit of a break, and I went there and I saw an internship was starting up actually in January. And I was like, you know what, this would be a perfect place for me to take a sabbatical, really just go deep in my prayer life, and take some time to reflect and see where I want to go. So that was my intention. I ended up staying. I ended up meeting my husband there.
Yeah, you fell in love.
Yes. Basically, I had the fairy tale. No, my husband was leading the media department. So obviously people connected us because I had been working in media. And then we ended up dating and getting married the following year. So that was my introduction. And then kind of my journey there was in both the media department. We started a media school and, helped lead that kind of school. Turned into like an internship. Well, it was an apprenticeship / internship that then turned into a full school.
Was the media school was like a part of IHOP? It was like the media side of training for the house of worship, the church, the school, those kinds of things?
My husband had previously worked for God TV. And so then a partnership occurred between God TV and the International House of Prayer. And in that partnership, we needed to train a bunch of people on how to properly do media. So we started an apprenticeship, and then we were broadcasting 24/7 on God TV. They had internet feeds around the world. So the concept was to help with prayer through the night hours, basically. Like there's always somewhere in the world that there was night happening. So they would put the House of Prayer feed on their night schedule. So we were kind of filming that and distributing it through their platform as well as our own web stream. So we raised up a whole team of media people to do that. And then that turned into a school called the Forerunner Media Institute that was part of IHOP-U.
Cool.
Golly, that's a huge endeavor. And so you were integrally involved and with all of this stuff, at least on the front end of bringing so much public exposure to what IHOP was doing, there at the early stages of that. And I remember when it started getting televised on God TV. I remember they were televising revival. That was kind of the way it was talked about, as I recall.
I wonder if I've ever worked with
Elizabeth-
Jono before. There's been God TV stuff I've done camera work for. So we'll have to compare notes and see if we ever worked on the same projects. So
Awesome.
Elizabeth, fill us in. I got to listen to your whole interview on the Wake Up and Win podcast. And honestly, I just felt like you did such a wonderful job. I was proud of you for getting out there and being so vocal and having such a huge backbone in all of this. So I'm very thankful, but I'd like to hear, tell us about how you got involved. You're muted, I think.
Thanks,
yeah,
Michael.
still muted.
So I
There you go.
Am I still? Hmm.
No, you're not.
It's just a
Am
lag.
Am I good? Okay. Okay. So I came to Kansas City in 1997 to attend Grace Training Center. There was no IHOP. And I came because of the message of passion for Jesus and just really wanting to live in a different way than, in a countercultural way. I had been raised in the church with incredible parents that gave everything for Jesus in the Jesus movement. And so that was the model for me. My dad was an Ivy League, Harvard Law, and burned his diplomas once he met Jesus. So I had my mom going to Berkeley Medical School. So I had this as this paradigm of giving it all, no matter what you were doing, whether it was business or, in ministry full time. And so I came to go to the Bible school, and I was also working, and ended up with the Lord just hijacking my life and giving me this beautiful experience in the business sector that ended up, I was recruited to a company in California. So I left Kansas City from about 99 to 2002. I was here for day one IHOP, and so my apartment was stashed with singers and musicians. And I think Misty and I came the same year. We were all in school together. Jen and Dwayne came maybe not even 6 months later. And so there's just a bunch of us are kind of like the day oneers, and we remember those early days, and we remember the May 7th launch, it just the trailers, the smells, the excitement, the ugliness. We remember it all, and so then in 2002, yeah, all in 2002, I was living in California as in kind of business development. And Mike asked me to come back to Kansas City to jump in and basically immediately be on the leadership team in the business departments, in the operations and business. We needed help with the retail. So when I first came, it was overseeing the bookstore and bizarrely enough, the coffee shop, not the operations. There was incredibly brilliant people doing that, but the budgeting, the profit and loss statements, the kind of, the inventory. And so I jumped in and did that. It was in pretty bad shape because of just faithful people who were doing their best, which is a theme throughout IHOP. Super faithful people doing their absolute best with given this huge dream, pouring it all out. And they may not be equipped to make those kind of decisions. And they may not have the knowledge to actually know, how much inventory to buy and hold on shelves. So the bookstore ended up $1 million in debt with $1 million of inventory on the shelves. Wow. And Mike said, "Can you come help?" And I didn't want to come. I was experiencing a beautiful life in California. I was living in wine country, and my career was skyrocketing. It was skyrocketing, but also it was on the bubble. Do you remember when the bubble was bursting and I think I'm maybe older than you guys. We were all making tons of money that we maybe shouldn't have been making. And then it starts to burst. So there was some of that going on, but I had every belief that I would just go from glory to glory, in the business world.
Sure.
But I felt like the Lord, I really did. I felt like he invited me to kind of lay it all down and come. And so I, obviously came for peanuts, we did the bookstore. So I was director of retail operations. And then I noticed that, we all noticed, I'm sure Jen is laughing right now, how hideous all of the marketing was, right? We didn't really have a logo. It was just hideous start to finish. And so I went to the team and I said, "Hey, let's get a logo, a brand book, That's all I knew. I just knew we needed those things. I had enough dabbling in marketing, had some phenomenally gifted designers that had come around. And that is where the flame logo that you see today was born, was out of our team. So I became the director of marketing too. I mean, this is so fun. It's so IHOP, right? I was like 20, who knows?
It's so larger than life. It sounds like you guys had so much going on and just a sudden meteoric rise to public attention. But I think you just said something that I want to hit on here. You mentioned how you had this all or nothing disposition. And I would imagine if I was to ask Shari and Jen the same, would you say that you also had this all or nothing disposition, which in and of itself is a right and good thing? Like, we want to be all in for Jesus. We want to be all in for the kingdom of God and advancing his kingdom. We're actually told to pick up our cross daily. Like, it is an all or nothing, die to self. And yet it's precisely that thing, which this is what the enemy does, is he takes advantage of the purity in our hearts. This is why some people have to be locked away. This is why there's this place called hell, this holding place for evil people, because they will prey on the purity of people who are doing right and good things. And I mean, it's all sort of, post hoc now, right? We know the ugly, dark secrets now, but and knowing also this feeling of being called by God, I imagine for each of you has been incredibly disorienting after the fact. Because would you each agree with this statement as well, that you all felt uniquely called by God? You actually felt God leading you there. Yeah, you're all nodding your heads. So I get it.
Your pre-show, let's not talk over each other, is hit its wall. That's what's happening right now, Miller.
Yeah,
we have 5 people on the show.
know.
You got to be real careful. We're really good at interrupting when there's only 3 of us. So yeah.
Jen, you tell me what that was like for you.
Yeah, I mean, there was so much mixture in my heart, if I'm honest. The whole call to missions when I was a young person got me into YWAM. I went into the nations because I thought I was going to be martyred and books would be written about me. So I already started with a bent towards self-importance. And the mission field did beat me up enough that I realized, I'm a little bit messed up in my perspective here. But it did start from a pure heart of, I had gotten saved from utter chaos. Unlike Elizabeth's family, my family was trash. And so, my dad's an ex-con, my stepdad's an ex-con, just craziness in my family background. And so me getting saved, I felt like my right response was lay my life out, pour it out. What can I do for the Lord? I can go to the nations. And so then hit the moment of burnout on the mission field. We were going in and out of the former Yugoslavia during the war in the 90s. I had heard so many stories of systematic rape and war crimes that my frame was burdened. I couldn't take it anymore. I was tired of there seemingly being a lack of authority on my life. The demonized weren't being set free with the word, like Matthew 8:16 says. I mean, there were so many gaps in my life. And so when I heard about just getting rooted in the word, going to Bible school. And then Mike started talking about this prayer room. I thought, you mean I can take these burdens to the Lord and he does something about them? So I got lit on fire with the whole concept of prayer, mainly because what I had seen in the nations. I had seen, prostitutes in the red light district in India, little girls held in cages. So I was so burdened, and the thought of pouring my heart out to God, knowing he sat above the circle of the earth and could change it, could fix it. I was all in on that. And that's what kept me there, is thinking, even when I became a mom and my life became, quote unquote, less important. That was a whole identity crisis I had to walk through. But I was definitely committed to the fact that I was going to give my life away. And I found a community of people who were as committed as I was. And that was beautiful. And some of those early days were exciting. We really thought we were at the tip of the arrow and we were doing something great. We were pioneering something great that the earth had never seen. That's heady wine for a young person. And I bought in hook, line, and sinker.
That's like a cult-like language when you think of, this is a phrase that is, I don't remember what book I read it in or what podcast I heard it in, but having simple solutions to complex problems is like the foundation for cult leaders. Like, hey, there are these, children in the red light district that are getting caged up. How do we fix it? Let's pray.
We pray.
It's a very
Yeah.
simple solution to a very complex problem. And there are so many ways that has to be addressed systematically, that has to be, addressed with government, has to address like, okay, cool. How do we put money towards this to buy some of these kids so that we can like offer them a normal life? I got friends in, I can't say where they are, Southeast Asia, and they are rescuing people by purchasing them. Like they're buying them out of the trade and then just kind of illegally adopting these people to being part of their families until they can grow up and make a life for themselves. So, that's difficult. Go ahead, Millie.
I was going to say this idea that a simple solution to an incredibly complex problem, it's such an easy thing to buy into. And all of you have just explained to me how you are all or nothing. And in that place of sort of all or nothing, one of the things we all kind of lack is this answer to level of confidence to what is the answer for this problem that we're all seeing. Jen, you're seeing massive evil in different parts of the world, and you're going, there's this simple solution. And I finally found the guy who has the answer. But then you also just mentioned how when you became a mom, that shifted dramatically. And Shari, I think you in particular experienced this. Here you are, you come with this massive background in media production. You come to IHOP, and there's a need and a place for you, something where you feel like you can contribute. But eventually that changed in your story. And I know we can get into some of the clergy sexual abuse stuff that happens. And all of you were at the very center of bringing that to the forefront. But you also have unique experiences of your own. It wasn't just clergy abuse. It was systemic abuse on every single level. And it didn't just happen sexually speaking. It was the posturing, the moving, the constant moving target it is to try to please Mike Bickle and have a voice. Shari, what happened in your story? You're working for IHOP, you've got this position, and then you become a mom.
Yeah. And just to go back a little bit based on what we
Sure.
were just talking on, I was going to add to that along with that weightiness of, I think, all of three of us, I would say, are pretty empathetic people that like you're just seeing, like Jen was explaining, these huge issues, and you're like, what can I do? And right. I think I would agree with all that. But then also Mike was really good. He would do all the time these Anna calls, he would call them, which was pretty much at the end of all of we had conferences every month and in the earlier days of IHOP, and you would hear this Anna call over and over and over. And it was a reference to Anna in the scriptures that would just spend her life in the house of prayer, and how that she ushered in, Jesus. And basically it was going like, God is raising up a people to do that again today and spend their life. And there was just such a like message, like there is no more important way to spend your life. I have email notifications that I thought I turned off.
You're fine. Don't worry about it.
I keep trying to turn off sounds. But I think hearing that over and over and over, like it becomes really hard not to, especially when you're young and you haven't gone through different seasons of maturity, to be tempted by that self-importance of going like, well, number one, there is that wanting to give your life away to something important that I think we all feel, and feeling meaningful, but then also just feeling like, yes, I am important. And then Mike would in back rooms all the time say like, yes, this is what people want, is to feel important. They have this longing in their soul. And he would always give these messages about how if you feel like a round peg in a square hole, then, maybe this is where you're supposed to be. But like, I mean, really, who doesn't feel like that most of the time, And so I think it was like, if you feel like you don't fit in, then this is the place for you. And so I think a lot of people identified with that and was like, okay, he's speaking to me. And I can definitely say that there were times I did. But
that's kind of it's a grooming technique.
Yeah.
Right? You hit on this need that everybody has to belong and to feel a part of something bigger than yourself. and you use that technique to get people to buy in. And then with these simplistic answers to very complex problems, it gives the people this level of confidence in that leader that you'll unquestioningly follow them. You'll get this loyalty that will cause you to sacrifice so much. I'm just thinking here out loud, but did you find yourself? Go ahead, Josh.
I was going to say, let me just kind of help you push to, let's thin out that fabric until we get to a point where we're like, yes, that makes tons of sense. Because I think at some point you would say that every pastor on the planet wants to call people to a mission of importance, to make disciples and to preach the gospel. So we don't want to reduce it down to, we want to give everyone purpose and meaning, right? You should have a purpose and meaning, and that's the one that Jesus set. I think where things become dangerous and cult-like is when we begin to offer the new thing. And you've gone to all these other churches, and these other churches haven't been able to offer you that sense of meaning and purpose. So we're going to create a new version of that. We're going to be a new tip of the spear. We're not going to focus on this. We're going to focus on this. And this is what's going to get us there. That's where I think things become dangerous, because you start putting an emphasis disproportionately on things that Jesus didn't put emphasis on. You create an unbalanced body, right? So we all say evangelism important, right? But if your church is always evangelism, always souls full of the altar and never discipleship, you're atrophying the body of Christ, right? Same thing. If it's all discipleship, no evangelism, so forth and so on. We could stretch this analogy to the nth degree. I think for people who are familiar with grooming techniques can hear what Miller is saying and go, yeah, that makes sense. But people who aren't familiar go, is that happening in my church? Well, you just have to ask yourself the question, is Jesus the one being repeated, or is there something new that's being added to the recipe that causes people to go, well, that's the new thing. That's the tip of the spear. That's nothing like I've ever been a part of, or anyone's ever been a part of. I want to jump on this train while I can. I think that's the specific technique that you're talking about there, Miller. And I just wanted to bring clarity to that.
Yeah, no, I think that's helpful. I think I'd like to hear also share the question I asked earlier about here you are, you find yourself caught up in this thing so much bigger than yourself. You feel like you have something to add, and then suddenly it's just discarded.
Yeah. I think what a lot of us my journey into motherhood was very complex because we had a premature infant that had like intense medical needs. He was in the NICU for 3 months. So it was a very jarring entry into motherhood. And I will say, and these are some of the reasons, because people stay in a community like this. The community was amazing at first, like giving us meals, helping us financially. We had a lot of bills to pay and, very, very supportive. And then as soon as he's out of the hospital, I'm like stuck at home, and it's like the community completely dried up, and it was like I had no way to engage. And I think the reasons for that was a lot of the way IHOP was set up did not give clear on-roads for moms to engage. So you had to be full-time, like going back to the all or nothing thing. It's like you either had to be full-time or part-time, which meant like you had to give a minimum of, I believe it was, and either Jen or Elizabeth jump in if I'm saying this wrongly, but 24 hours a week, you had to be in I think it was 10 hours in the prayer room and then another, I can't remember the exact requirements, but whatever they were, it was not feasible for me to do it. And so then it was like, you could just go and be in the prayer room, but then you were cut off from actually feeling like you were part of the ministry. Yeah. And I think the big thing that I have told a lot of people was just there weren't clear discipleship structures set up. So if you weren't on staff, it was really hard to know how to engage in. And then or if the community really happened on worship teams or in a department you were working for, you had to be on staff somehow. And there was so many people on staff making next to nothing, but because they were making next to nothing, it allowed for a ton of people to be employed. And that's where the community really occurred. So then if you were not holding one of those positions, basically you created your own community somehow, they would start, they would encourage small groups to start up, but there was no like curriculum or system that we were following. that was clearly discipling people. So you had people coming to IHOP from so many backgrounds, whether they're coming out of Amish, Catholic. I mean, it could be like we had a cult leader, like another cult leader that started a small group that brought a whole group with him. And I think that so easily occurred because there wasn't like,
Well, the attention was all on the prayer room, right?
yeah,
Isn't
yeah,
that then how it worked out? It was like everything had to be about the prayer room. And so the neglect of the other areas of church life was massive. And so
yeah.
it left a gaping hole for people who are narcissistic to come in and lead a smaller section of the group into massive heresy and immorality.
Yeah. And I think that's what, even it was really hard to navigate as a young mom because, I was being given books on this one particular book called How to Train Up a Child that was written by an Amish couple that a lot of people would look at that and say, oh, that's literal abuse. But there's a whole contingent of moms that were following this and saying this is the right way to be a mother. And then there's a whole group that are just basically any extreme practice you can think of. There was a group around it, and there wasn't clear preaching from the stage or kind of groups to go to say like, hey, how do I do this? So I think overall IHOP just did not have a focus on like holistic family life and how to in discipleship. It was, a focus on one area. So then if you are not giving yourself full time to those areas and you're finding yourself suddenly thrust out, you're kind of navigating this whole web of information with people associated with the community. So it slightly endorses it. And some of them could even be leading groups, but they're not actually being supervised properly what they're teaching. So I know tons of people that ended up in like, different political type mom groups, different, there was so many different philosophies being taught. And then, there wasn't really oversight for it. So that was kind of difficult. And then, of course, like in a lot of Christian areas, like my son had some special needs. So we were having to do a lot of therapies and navigating public school systems. And then almost all the community was putting this like really, really strong importance on homeschooling being the only right way to do things. And so then put me on the outside of that as well. But anyway, it just was like in a lot of those groups, it was kind of like you as a woman, this is your biggest calling on earth, to be a wife and a mother and doing this well. And again, there was truth to everything being said, but it was like that was kind of the only avenue once you to function within the community that I was being shown that this is like the only place I could have is to serve as a mother. And it wasn't like there was an inroad to join the community in another way, unless you were like,
it
on a
was
worship.
reductionistic. So it was like, hey,
Yeah.
this is super important, but let's reduce it to as if this is the only thing it's like the pastor who it's like preaching the word of God is the most important thing a pastor can do. And it's like, yeah, that seems like a truism, but like if you reduce everything to that and you realize it's like 10% of what pastoral ministry actually is, like there's meeting people in hospitals and caring for people and burying folk and marrying folk. And there's this whole process, Elizabeth, you've got a similar experience, if I recall, of being kind of at the table, having kids, and that affecting life. Could you maybe weigh into that as well?
Yeah, I think it's interesting how many different kinds of experiences all of us have, because mine really is that because there was a great need for me, I was in a niche that no one else could do or was doing. I got this special treatment that I was able to be at the leadership table. And even though I had kids, I was able to say, I'm not doing prayer room hours because I can't. But they needed what I had to offer badly enough that it was allowed, if that makes sense.
It was a double standard.
And I don't think it has to do with I was so much more. Yeah. Yeah. I think that there was probably a perception, potentially, I'm just throwing this out there, about what Shari's role, like, hey, we could probably find somebody else to do that. Right. They were, to this day, they have had a hard time finding somebody who's willing and excited to do fundraising, which is what I ended up doing for most of my time there. I was the director of development, raised millions and millions and millions of dollars that came into, stewarded that, helped raise it. And that's kind of a rarity, right? And so Mike actually said to me, Lizzie, don't get a calling to the prayer room. I need you doing what you do. Right. So I have this, and I would love to hear Jen talk about this because she has some really amazing insights. I had this, get out of jail free card, or there's probably a better word, but Mike handed those out indiscriminately, and there was no rhyme or reason. And so you have an entire community of people that are kind of, everybody has their own caveat, right? Their own special thing, down to who gets to go behind the stage this time and who doesn't, and that same person doesn't next time. It was just a very inordinate structure. I now think part of that was to keep us all a little bit on our heels, a little off tilt. So I was allowed to be at the leadership table.
What you just described, and I'm trying to avoid the whole me too. But what I remember from my former organization, which I think is toxic and abusive, was that it felt like there was this moving target, and you never knew how to hit that target. You would get these massive compliments when you did something right or was something loyal. But then suddenly opportunity would be removed, and you were never really given a clear understanding of what you did wrong for that opportunity to be removed. And so that moving target was always there. And it was always at the center, surrounded by, at least at my church, around that one guy. If you could please that person, then opportunity would be available. And if you displease that person, opportunity would be removed. But you would never know it. You would never know what you did or why you did it. It just seemed to be no rhyme or reason for any of it. It seems like that's what you're describing, that everything centered around Mike. He had this power that he could give or take, and there was never clarity as to why it was given or why it was taken. So yeah, Jen, please step in on that. Help me and us understand.
Oh, that's this is a 3-hour conversation, but I'm going to try to keep it.
I know.
I think the favoritism was pretty severe, and it created, and the favoritism changed regularly. You didn't know the criteria by which it was based on which day. And so there is systemic insecurity amongst people, which bred competition and almost an indifference when someone got cast aside. It was like, "Ooh, glad that wasn't me." So it did not bond people to anyone else, which, I mean, I think that's what he wanted. He didn't, Mike in particular, did not want bonding with other people. He wanted attachment to him so that he would be the keeper of our destinies. He would be the rescuer. He would be the hero. So it created this context by which we needed him, and it was a mess. And so
tell us your experience. How did that happen to you? Because it happened. You experienced it firsthand.
Oh, for sure. Firsthand. Multiple experiences. I mean, one, I remember I spoke at a One Thing conference, and it went well. And he told me how amazing it was. And he told me that my message was the best message of the whole conference. And he went on, and he was so proud of me. And man, it felt amazing. Of course, it felt amazing. And so I thought, okay, I've broken through, and I'm going to be like a regular gal now. I'm going to be one of the gals. Well, next conference comes up, and I'm not on the schedule, and no communication. And then you're left to just question yourself. Okay, what did I do? What wrong thing did I say? And so you're questioning everything. And there was no feedback system other than high praise or silence, high praise and silence. And so you didn't know what you did wrong. And then it just left so much insecurity. And so the competition around that became intense. And I think Mike had to do favors for people. He had to keep people close to him now we know so that they wouldn't expose his secrets. And so there were favors to be handed out all the time to keep people loyal to him. And it just created a very toxic culture. And the fact that I mean, my story's not unique. This is very common. High praise, high praise, high praise, and then nothing. No opportunity, maybe for a few months, maybe for a few years. And then when you get called back in, you're like, oh, I'm back in. And then you're embarrassed that you needed that. I mean, that's what I would do to myself. I would shame myself. Oh, if my identity were in Christ, this wouldn't hurt me. If I didn't care so much, oh, my selfish ambition, there it goes again, running amok. And so I would gaslight.
You're gaslighting yourself.
Yes. Yeah. And then it eventually chips away at your confidence so that you don't know who you are anymore. And you just try to find your place in the system where you can fit and it won't be disruptive to other people. But it was just a mess.
So you become this kind of person that's just satisfied to eat whatever crumbs are available. And if you get a crumb, it's like you go from like 0 to 100, or like from absolute low to like I'm on the mountain again and I've arrived. Is that what you're describing?
That's what I'm saying. And yet I'm embarrassed to hear you say it that way, but it's absolutely accurate. And I'm embarrassed that, yes, that is the truth. And I felt that way. And I think I should have known better. But the truth is, yeah, I was a whipped dog that would have come.
But it's not like it happened overnight. This was death by slow little messages over a prolonged period of time and years. You know, I can hear the critic out there saying, well, why did you tolerate this? It's the frog in the boiling pot.
Yes.
You just incremental teardowns filled with this massive praise and then silence, which, by the way, it is proven. Like, this isn't like some former victim just saying, hey, silence hurts people. No, silence is actually a massive form of abuse. Yeah. They call it the silent treatment. As a matter of fact, I think the Gottman Institute, when it comes to marriage, talks about a massive predictor for divorce is when one of the partners uses the silent treatment to punish their partner. Yeah. And that's what you all were experiencing.
Well, we were all experiencing that. I remember one other situation, it seems so minor, but like you're saying, they build upon each other. And so we were going to do, this is, I can't remember what year, but we had a big, spiritual warfare conference, like 5,000 people were coming and it was like a big deal. And Dwayne and I were asked to pray at the conference because we were considered like really great intercessor. We were prayer leaders and Mike would give the high fives. You're so anointed. You're so fiery. You're amazing. You're the best. And so I was getting high fives all the time. And so we were asked by someone who was helping him organize this event to pray. And then they came back to us and said, hey, Mike actually doesn't want you to pray because he doesn't think you do the model right. And so we're like, okay. I mean, I don't want to be sad that I'm not praying, but it feels weird. So I go to Mike privately. This is after the conference. And I said, hey, Mike, teach me. Like, what am I doing wrong? You high five me all the time. And then we get asked and then the invitation is taken away. Like, what? And he says, you're a dime a dozen. You're a dime a dozen. He says, if I want someone really anointed, and he lists about 3 or 4 other women, these are the women I'll have. But you're a dime a dozen. So I leave grateful that he told me the truth, but recognized that I wasn't one of his favorite ones. And I probably should just die to any desire to express any public gifts.
And you're the problem for now feeling a dime a dozen, even though he told you that. Yes, you're now the problem.
Well, that's my problem. My identity was in the wrong place. And therefore, this would help crush it and kill it. And so that I could actually come out like gold. And so I allowed myself to be treated like trash, because that being treated badly like that was killing my pride and my ambition. And that was God's ultimate goal.
Well, if you guys, and I'm seeing a lot of head shaking here, so I'm assuming this is kind of a accepted pattern within the movement here. Can you tell me about, I mean, if you viewed yourself as that expendable, how easy was it to see leaders, beloved church members, and I say church members, members of the community, because this is, house of prayer, school, this is all these interconnected pieces, for them to leave and then to think nothing of it, to almost like a careless detachment. Well, they're no longer part of the movement. They're no longer part of the vision. They no longer have the drive to lay it all on the line and sacrifice in the house of prayer. Does it create a sense of superiority in us every time someone leaves? We're good. We're able to stay. They're not so good. They left. Would one of you kind of weigh in on
Josh,
just kind of the expendable nature of people in this movement? Miller's like, me too. Like,
no, it's not that. It's not that. I'm aware of just the massive, how sensitive it is to, I mean, what Jennifer just said and what Shari and Elizabeth are both nodding their heads to is honestly this admission of guilt. And they all feel it deeply. And it is like, this is what happens when you've been in that kind of toxic environment. You feel this sense of regret and blame for the way that things were just allowed to happen and yet doing nothing. And so there's this remorse that comes. And I can just imagine for each of you feeling like the whole world is watching you admit this stuff. And yet anybody who would cast aspersion on any three of you, or anybody who would cast aspersion or judgment on any three of you for acknowledging this is what was happening, I just go, you don't get it. If you haven't experienced it firsthand, you don't understand what it's like to be groomed and brainwashed into accepting this kind of poor treatment. And that's what it is. I think that needs to be acknowledged here, is that there was a slow death, a slow brainwashing of every person to tolerate this kind of thing, and then to so easily discard others when they're upset for not tolerating this kind of thing.
I mean, I'll weigh in for a second. I mean, because I still want to hear, but just to that same token, so that people who are watching can kind of empathize with some of this. I mean, I've experienced this. Miller has experienced this. And I would say it was accidental where I was. It was not an intentional thing. There wasn't some kind of like master manipulator who like kind of worked through the organization.
For me, intentional.
For you, it was, right? But like for me, I was raised in Steve Hill's church after Brownsville. So Brownsville takes place. He moves to Texas. He plants a church at 6300 North Beltline, Las Colinas, Texas. That's the church I grew up in my teen years, youth conferences, everything. I was an intern there, went to Bible school there, the whole bit. And Steve gets sick. He has cancer, right? Well, there's a bunch of prophetic words that have been released about how Steve's going to get healed, and we're going to usher in the third great awakening, right? Like we were talking like that. We were the cat's pajamas and the bee's knees. Well, then people would leave, and pastors would leave, and it, when they would take folk and they'd go plant a church down the road, there was like this kind of aggression, this bitterness, this they weren't willing to believe these prophetic words, and then Steve moves to Alabama, and then Steve dies. And then it was like, oh crap, we just bought into this whole thing of lies. And like, we're kind of like sifting back through like, oh wait, that was super prideful. And nobody realized it. We just thought we were committed. We just thought we were obedient to Christ's mission, when it was a prophetic word that if a pastor had heard should have come alongside and said, hey guys, we're going to judge and test everything. Our mission is to care for the people in front of us, right? If God, by the grace of God, would allow us to transform people's lives and that would have global impact, praise God. But we're not going to put our hopes in that. We're going to put our hopes in being obedient to the Great Commandment and the Great Commission and worshiping God well, right? Like just kind of pastoring that moment. And I acknowledge as a young person, I mean, I was between 17 and 19 during that season. I totally got sucked into that and demonized everyone who left our church. So it's extremely easy to do. And the reason I say that it wasn't intentional by an individual is because the individual leading the movement was bedridden. He was sick the whole time. It just kind of happened. Someone gave a prophetic word, and then it was just kind of in the culture, in the water, as it were. And anyway, so I don't mean to belabor the point, but just to say that it's a shared experience amongst most of us. Does somebody want to weigh into that on how the expendable nature of individuals, ministers, beloved family members in the movement were kind of just tossed to the side, and why, and how you guys have processed that? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Again, and I'll be interested in Michael's, especially his insights to this. It's this bizarre two-sided thing that Mike always did, where you're fully released. He was always like, oh, you're fully released. We bless. We don't try and hang on to anybody. Anyone can come and, poach our people. But at the same time, you are, if you do that, you're completely forgotten. And the stories of people, I think the many pain stories that people have surround this reality that you poured out. This is not just your life. Like, for everyone watching, remember, I want you to envision this ecosystem that is your church, your hobbies most of the time, your community, your job, and to some degree, sometimes your kids' school. Like, everything is part of this ecosystem. That level of loss, and I think we need to remember for the people that are still part of IHOP right now, it's almost unimaginable. I don't know. I don't think some human frames can actually take it all at one time, that level of loss. And so, when we would see people leave, it was much easier, right, to say like, we bless them, the Lord's moving him on, and not actually grieve the hole that there was, because to acknowledge that the humans were leaving a hole is too painful, because there was so much of that. If that makes sense. But Mike kept, now we can say Mike was doing this. We sure weren't thinking that at the time. We noticed the dysfunction. I think all of us, I know that for years, Jen and Shari and I and others have had conversations about the dysfunction, but we always put it into, well, every family's dysfunctional. And I used to say, boy, I'd rather be doing this with this dysfunctional family than anything else on the earth. In fact, we're still hearing that from the platform. These comments, I would rather be doing this with this spiritual family than anything else. This is not new. This is something that has been said for forever as kind of we know we're messed up. We know we're not very good at a lot of things, but at least we're together, except we weren't. The minute that you aren't able to toe the line and continue to show up, you're told, we love you, we bless you, but you're done, right? And you're just kind of persona non grata. So I don't know if that makes sense, but it was this totally constant push-pull. And I know that, something that I feel this personal great grief over, and even a desire to publicly repent for this, is the discarding of people who did come with grievances or tried to say, I'm not being treated fair, or this painful thing happened to me at the hands of a leader. I mean, the speed with which that stuff would be dismissed, you guys. And my perspective was always, the first thing I thought was, what kind of damage did you have when you came here to IHOP that we couldn't solve for you?
Oh, gosh.
You must have come damaged. Therefore, anything we do is going to feel like rejection. What can you do? There's just nothing that we can do. I had that perspective. And I want to ask publicly for forgiveness for that. So many people that have been wounded and had their real pain dismissed by leaders, even if it wasn't to their face, right? It was us discussing it at the next leadership meeting, like, oh, yeah. And so I just, if this makes the cut, I just ask for forgiveness. And I want to own that I was part of that, I'm learning this word, moral injury, that there's a moral injury that happens to us when we are part of an abusive system, that we end up wounding others the way we've been wounded. And now we're in this complex situation where we are both abused and abuser. And I think that all of us are trying to untangle that, especially those of us who kind of have been there up until more recently.
Yeah.
So,
Elizabeth, thank you for sharing that. I know that's a hard thing to talk through and talk about. It takes a lot of bravery. I'm thankful for that kind of plea, repentance, and I think this is where one of the reasons we want to do programs like this. This is not the bread and butter of Remnant Radio. We don't want to be investigative journalists. That's not our thing. We want to. This is a moment that affects the broader evangelical charismatic movement very heavily. So this is a worthy, kind of investigative journalism, I suppose, to tell these stories.
Well, it's an ecclesiology question at the end of the day. Like the fact is we've been asking real hard theological questions on the Remnant Radio, but the thing where it hits into the orthopraxy is right here. Like this is systemic in the body of Christ. And if there's nobody bringing information to show like, here's the common threads you can pull on to go, this is toxic, then it doesn't matter what your theology is. You're going to end up burning out of the church and walking away from the church.
Well, let me finish that statement. Cause I think it's either Bully Pulpit or Church Called Tove. I think it's in Tove. He mentions another psychologist, I think it is. And he says something to the effect of, if you go to a church that abuses people, if you go into a church that's harsh in their leadership and you're able to look past it, you become the kind of person that goes to that kind of church. And I think what Elizabeth is expressing is she goes, people come to this church and I just assumed it was their baggage that they brought. What I didn't realize was by tolerating this kind of, it's not our fault, it's always someone else, I became the kind of person that shifted that blame off of our responsibility onto other people. And it's the reason we have to have conversations like this and think through the practice of church ministry, because our church molds us. Where we go to church, the people that we surround ourselves with, it molds our character, our actions, our integrity. And over time, we don't realize this, but it shapes us in such a way that we become the kind of person that goes to that kind of church. And if you are seeing things in your community that are abusive, things in your community that are harsh, leadership directions and missions that are contrary to the gospel ethic, you need to be a person to speak out. So as much as I'm commending these women for doing that, simultaneously kind of acknowledging that there's an audience here who is going to a church like this to say, hey, if you can voice these concerns now, we can actually maybe avoid some of this kind of unraveling of Christendom that we're seeing, globally right now. Miller, I know you had a thought there.
Yeah, I just remember one of the things that similar when you're on the inside and at the top, it's like top of the world, right? Everybody praises you. They all want to be your friend. But then when you're gone, when you're moved from that position, all those people who wanted to be your friend just never call. And what Elizabeth, you just mentioned was what we call the ad hominem arguments that start getting thrown out. So like you come with this complaint, I feel abused, I feel neglected, I feel hurt. Well, what did you bring before you got here? What was told about me when I was fired from my church was, this is the narrative that started going around. Now, this is just his abandonment issues playing up. Now, think about what just happened. You have a pastor who's been confided in. You go to that pastor, you tell them the hardest things about your life. You tell them about the baggage that you're bringing with you. And then when you leave after being abused, they use pastoral information that was given in confidence, that was confided to them. They use that information to discredit you. I'm watching a church here in Denver do this to a number of people right now. Like he'll love bomb them. He'll ask them all of these very personal and intimate questions about them. And then when they leave and having complaints about him, he can now use that information to discredit them and discount them. It's ad hominem nausea. Shari, you had your... Go ahead.
I'm just going to say, as far as boundaries go, knowing the character of people is super important. But I also want to encourage believers to part of Christian ministry is getting hurt. It is what it is. Jesus had Judas, and it's better to be hurt, right? It's better to have loved once than never to have loved at all, that kind of thing. It's better to live your life on the line with your heart being exposed and allowing people to hurt you than to bottle that up and then prevent any of that pain. So I'm saying that because not because I'm trying to invite people into pain at all, but that real loving pastoral ministry looks like being able to expose your heart to your pastor. It is horribly evil when those pastors then misuse that information. And that is not a call for believers to bottle up their pain. That's a call for integrous men and women of God to do their jobs well. And then when that gets misused, that you call them out on that. And then as a church, we find a way to fix that problem. What I wouldn't want a believer to hear is Miller telling that story. Oh, I better never open up to my pastor. Like, whoa, whoa, whoa. These people will give an account before God. Hebrews tells us that your elders of your church will one day answer to God. And if they use that information to manipulate you and gaslight you, there will be objective justice one day, right? But that doesn't mean that you should live in darkness. Like, expose things to the light, talk, be vulnerable.
Right.
Those are good things. And just make sure that you're in a church that is safe enough for those things to take place. Anyway, I'm sorry. I'm like trying to counsel both sides.
I know
of
we're
this
trying
group.
to pastor people
There's so many
worldwide
people
with
watching this
conversation. Hey, Shari, you had mentioned earlier about the tendency to go introspective rather than to acknowledge the behavior that was being committed against people. Talk to us more about that.
Yeah, picking up before we were talking about just how we were always like pushed to look inside of ourselves whenever something was happening. My husband was fired multiple times in different roles that he held. And it's
By the
something
way, when he was fired, did he know he was fired, or he just didn't get invited to a meeting?
Dramatic, and it's something that like I've like afterwards we're like, okay, how did we allow this in our lives? And it's something we're I've processed through since then, going like, this is going to sound ridiculous to anybody else on the outside, because so when he was leading the media department, keep in mind that he had started the media department when he first came to IHOP. There was not even a tape duplication machine, and he purchased it out of his own money because he felt like his mandate was as a messenger, to use IHOP language. It was like, we are raising up messengers. And so that's what he personally felt. And so he really took that seriously in getting out, prayer and worship and utilizing all the tools and methods he could find. So, he had started the web stream, he had started everything from the ground up. And then, Mike was famous of putting different people in positions that didn't necessarily have the qualifications for being there. And then it created this really unstable system in which you're constantly having somebody over you that doesn't necessarily understand what you're doing, but you have to listen to them. And then you're told, oh, that's how we're developing humility in you so that you don't get prideful and you just need to deal with.
Why did he do that?
I think that's a whole nother conversation. Why?
Well, I'm wondering, was he putting people in positions to groom them? Was he putting people in positions to control them? Was he they knew that they were being given this grace that they didn't deserve and they weren't qualified for. And so he can make them feel important, make them feel seen. Meanwhile, it was causing massive problems for everybody else. He was able to control them. They felt super indebted to him because he was giving them this opportunity. But then it would actually create more dysfunction because they knew they weren't qualified. They knew they didn't have the skill set. So then you have imposter syndrome where they're using other tools doing mandates or misusing authority because they don't actually have the skill set to develop the department properly. So then, you're not actually an effective leader. And so basically Jono kept being put under people like this. And we were just like, what is happening? And we kept thinking it was just Mike's mercy towards these people and, giving him the benefit of the doubt. But in one situation, it was over something very stupid that Mike had requested regarding the filming of something. And it was something that didn't make sense practically. And Jono pushed back and just was like, well, that doesn't make sense. I don't think I want to do it that way. And this person flew off the handle and says, you cannot question Mike Bickle. That is, you are prideful, you're arrogant, you're stubborn, you're a horrible leader. You will never lead anything. And then he said, I'm firing you. And then he didn't talk to him for 2 weeks. And so we're sitting there going, okay.
He was fired for a question about the pragmatics of using a camera.
Yes. And this was a person that had no media experience whatsoever. He had
this person feeling threatened responds.
Yeah.
harshly because they don't want to be exposed for being the idiot that they are in that position.
Totally.
Sorry, probably shouldn't
And
use the word idiot.
so we're sitting there, and of course, Jono goes to Mike and was like, what's happened here? And Mike's response was, "You're in your David and Saul season." And he goes, this is
spiritualize it.
formed. You are a like basically telling him he's a David, he has a Saul. And we're like, well, so you're saying you're putting a demonized king over us. Like, and
Wait a
Wait,
second.
did you say that?
Saul.
Please tell
Give
me you said
second.
that.
no, but this is what we're thinking. And it's like, but at the same time, you're like going, okay, well, maybe it's true. Maybe like, because at the time it was like, there were so many other things that didn't make sense and you're feeling insecurity. Anyway, it just was the same person then hired a replacement for Jono that was directly out of college, no experience. And then after 2 weeks of not speaking to him, came back and said, you need to train this person. And then you're done. And we're like, what in the actual? And this person had no idea how to do the job. So anyway, it's just stuff like that.
And then Jono did it, I assume, because I've met Jono. He's an agreeable person. So he
Right.
went and he went ahead and trained that person after getting fired, right?
Did, and we just like took it as like, and I mean, we both did, like we were both like, but it made for this incredibly awkward like season of life where you're just like, you're watching this person stumble through having no clue what they're doing. Mike's telling you like, oh, this is just about character development. And so I guess the point that like, after we grow in maturity and realize like how wrong this is just realizing that the overarching issue that happened again and again and again. And I have probably 50 more examples just like this one that I could name off, if you gave me an hour, maybe a whole day I could go through, but it's just that we weren't ever, the system, and Mike specifically, never facilitated healthy relational development and structure with an organization. It was always pushed to go to the prayer room, deal with it with Jesus, introspection, death to self, instead of saying, okay, maybe that was wrong with what that guy said. So let's work it. Let's have a meeting. Let's work through this. Let's figure out like what we could change so that your life is more functional, that you're growing in your giftings. Those were never conversations that were had.
Yeah.
And so then it left you trying to figure out like, how do I grow and develop as a person in my gift set? Like there weren't like clear paths. It was just like constantly going like, okay, you have too much pride, you're arrogant, like, and if you could only fix that, then you could have a seat at the table. Otherwise it was like, so I think
it's Darvo, right? You deny, you accuse, and you reverse the victim offender order. And so here you are telling stories of being victimized, but then you're also being told in the same moment, well, actually, your victimization is your problem because it's God doing this to you, not this offender, not this abusive leader. It's God disciplining you because you're the sinner. So see how you quickly become the problem rather than the one who's being hurt. And I'm sorry to cut you off, Shari. I think there's one other thing I wanted to get to just with the time we have, but I know, Jennifer, you experienced this. You watched Dwayne experience this. And then on top of that, all of you have come forward and brought forward allegations. And now on the other side of it, being outside the organization, and then there's all of these things being said about you, the ad hominem arguments. You're now on the experiencing side of that, of being discredited by these ad hominem arguments. So,
yeah, I think, there's a couple phrases that Mike used in leadership. One was, sometimes you have to mow the lawn. And the other one was,
what does that mean?
It means if something grows up too big, cut it down. So, and that was in Dwayne's case. One thing grew, and and some people knew Dwayne and they didn't know Mike Bickle. And that I believe that was a direct threat to Mike, and Dwayne's strength in building and pioneering. He caused something to flourish, and it was a threat to Mike. So he mowed the lawn. And and
Oh, yeah.
and so that's a philosophy he has. Sometimes you got to mow the lawn. The other thing I've heard him say so many times in back rooms, because Mike didn't personally believe in firing. He's like, if someone is a volunteer, you don't fire a volunteer, you reposition them. So
Did he only believe in firing for Jono? Like, was he just the one guy that got fired over and over again?
No, he used other people to do it.
Oh, he used other people to do it.
He never did his own dirty work.
Nice.
Yeah, he had mentioned
Kind of like showing up to a reconciliation meeting and being fired, and the person firing you isn't in the room. I have no idea what that's like.
Yeah,
that's it.
He hires someone else to mow his yard, is what you're saying.
Yeah. Well, he does. The other thing that I heard so many times is Mike would say, I'm going to make it easy for that person to go. So meaning creating circumstances that made it impossible to do their job, or to create so much pressure that they couldn't take it anymore. And then they walked away so that Mike didn't fire them. And so
that's vile.
It's vile. And, this is really Dwayne's story to tell. So I don't want to tell too much of it because it really is his story, but that's what happened to him. One, the lawn got mowed, and two, the circumstances became so difficult. Dwayne was the director of one thing, and all of a sudden, Mike was calling meetings that Dwayne normally would call, and Mike's calling the meetings and not inviting Dwayne to the meetings. And Dwayne would find out about the meeting afterwards, but he was the director, but wasn't invited. And so the writing was on the wall. Dwayne knew the phrase. So 3, 4, 5 of those kinds of situations happened. So Dwayne says, hey, I'm going to resign. And Mike was like, oh, really? Oh, okay. And so that's awful. Toxic,
so you're
terrible.
being pushed out, but then even your perception of being pushed out is your problem because I'm not the one doing this to you.
Yes.
And so it's an easy way to remove somebody without ever taking responsibility for the pain that you're causing them.
Yes.
Or having to actually develop people.
Exactly.
Like, hey, you're not operating in a way that I would like. Here's what I need to tell you. Instead of taking ownership of your experience of that person and helping develop them to become something better than what they are, you just create the circumstances that make it so unbearable for them to be there that way they take the blame for their own exit.
But in the process of that, we didn't see it as evil necessarily. We saw it as an opportunity to go deep in God because we had been groomed to think that way.
That's an introspection.
Here's another moment for us to lay it down. Philippians 2, Jesus did not consider equality with God something to be grasped or held on to. We're not going to hold these titles. We're not going to get our identity from this stuff. And so we probably didn't feel the pain of some of that for years later because we were so groomed to find God in the midst of the pressing and see it as good. And this is an amazing opportunity. Who's going to get a mistreatment opportunity like this on the global scale? But unfortunately, that left us exposed in ways of people just assumed Dwayne had maybe moral failure, because that's also how we would deal with moral failure. There would just be a change of position without any communication. And so I'm fielding questions of what did your husband do? And
so the post hoc narrative is assumed.
Yes.
Because if you leave this narcissistic organization, something must be wrong with you to leave.
Yes. Yes. And like Elizabeth, I have deep grief over the lack of curiosity I had over the hundreds of people I watched walk out the door. And I had heard that they were offended, or I had heard that they couldn't take it anymore. I had heard some narrative. And I just believed it and didn't ask a question and didn't walk them out the door and say, how are you doing as you go? Yeah. I feel sick about that, like truly. And I sinned in that way of being indifferent to people's lives being rocked all around me. And I just went, whew, I'm still here. That's awful. That's awful. And I think it's 16,000 people have come through IHOP, either a staff or a student. And I would say majority of them are not doing well. And I think I have partial responsibility in that. And the community has partial responsibility in that. And it's awful that people sacrificed so much, gave all that they had, lived at poverty level, and they were just a cog in the wheel, and they were replaceable. I've heard this expression, the fire on the altar will never go out because we keep throwing bodies on it.
Oh gosh,
that's like Mark Driscoll's bus quote gone to torturous levels.
But it is very fitting. What
Yeah.
you just described is very fitting because people were disposable.
Mhm.
It wasn't the people that mattered. It was this vision of keeping the fire burning.
Mhm.
And so the discarding of individuals that are made in God's image. Let me remind you, I mean, this is the irony here. And you hear this in prayer rooms everywhere. Our mission is to minister to the heart of the Lord, right? It's to keep that fire burning. Ironically, because when you discard those who are made in God's image, tell me exactly how you're ministering to them.
Mhm.
That's right. Elizabeth, I saw that you had something that you wanted to add just now to something that Jennifer was saying. I have a question, but I'm going to postpone it because I'd like to hear from you on that same subject.
Yeah, well, I'm going to be opportunistic, and I want to seize this opportunity especially with you two that are in somewhat of a pastoral, albeit removed as people watch this. And I'm asking you to do something, and that is to expose and remind all the young leaders that came to Mike. I remember multiple times on the platform, these couch conversations. Mike, teach us your ways about conflict resolution.
Oh gosh.
Does this ring a bell that people would come from all over and want to know his brilliance about how he did conflict resolution and how did he deal with all of the attacks from the outside? And I'm asking you guys to open the kimono on this and blow this open, and that every leader that took his advice, I pray that they would burn it, rip it and burn it, because what we're telling you, what others are going to tell you, this is the underbelly behind it. This is how he pulled it off. This is how people were silenced. I mean, I actually, to Shari's story, before you guys were married, Shari, I'm sure you know this, I was in Israel with Jono. We led a trip. We come home, Jono's been fired. While he was gone, comes back to find out you don't lead Forerunner Music anymore. What? I mean, these kind of things, that's how Mike does it, right? He does what he's doing right now. He refuses to answer accusation. He refuses to answer. And so that is not a solution. And I remember Andy Bird, Francis Chan sitting and drinking this in from him, asking him on that, and Chris Reed, tens of thousands of people are watching Mike give advice on how to handle conflict resolution. And I pray with my whole heart that everybody burns it, because this is what was behind it.
Well, I'll tell you that.
Thanks, guys.
No, that's great. That's right.
Go ahead,
that's right.
Josh.
I was going to say that we've aired this a little bit already. There was an accusation made against a prophetic figure that we had caught wind of, that we'd been told about, and we were doing an investigation, and we were going to go confront, and this person was going to make it right, and that kind of thing. If they made it right, as in confessed, repented, made restoration, those kinds of things, then we weren't going to do anything about it. And if they lied, pretended it didn't happen, that kind of thing, we would go public. Because we were doing a kind of, again, pseudo investigation, because we're not investigative journalists.
Well, it fell into our lap.
It fell into our lap. A lot of people came and told us
into it.
We had a responsibility to do something. So somehow Mike found out, and I was just up at the house of prayer praying. I'm 7 hours from there, I think. So I just drove up and just kind of hung out for the week. I stayed in Tripp's place, if you guys know him. He's got an Airbnb there. So I stayed there and popped into the prayer room, and
Mike cornered you.
Mike cornered me. He's like, "Hey man, come here. Let's come and talk." And we went into the little video room, and he started asking me, "Hey man, like we don't ever go public." And I was just like, if there's no repentance, we go public, and like that was the way that the conversation was going, because the push was we never ever go public. The Lord does that; He'll handle it. Nope. Like that's just not. It wasn't even in my wheelhouse to do. Like it's one thing.
Well, how the Lord deals with it is through people going public. That's how the Lord deals with it.
Matthew 18, you confront privately. I want this person to be able to exert mastery in their own life to show a fruit of repentance. If I just go straight public, then what happens is we'll never know if this person repents, if it'll ever be genuine or legit. If they then go public, if they confess, if they own their mistake in a real tangible way, then people can go, oh, there's a real fruit here. Like, my hope would have been that the accusations at IHOP, they came forward and Mike would have said, man, I'm busted. I'm going to repent. I'm going to remove myself from leadership. I'm going to own this. I'm going to get on the stage. I'm going to say, hey, I got no business in leadership. I don't know why I've been here this whole time. Like, and then people can go, well, man, I think this guy might be in heaven with us. It doesn't mean we're ever going to hand him the mic again. It doesn't mean that we're going to let this guy be a minister ever, but like, oh, wow, fruit of repentance. Like, man, I hope to, share a meal with him in the New Jerusalem, but like, there's just no fruit of repentance. There's no fruit of the work of the Spirit in this guy's life at all. So like people are asking questions about restoration. I'm like, I'm asking questions about salvation. What are you talking about restoration? This guy hasn't repented of heinous evil sins. So anyway, all that to say that like that kind of model, Matthew 18 doesn't apply to victims and those who have been abused and those kinds of things. I want to be very clear with that, but talking about giving someone an opportunity to have to come forward for public sins, to confess those public sins, that is just and right and good and fitting and proper. That's the way those things take place. So I'm very much with you, Elizabeth. Those things need to be destroyed. The advice to bottle up is garbage.
We got two conversations that I want to have, and I don't know if we'll have time to pull it off, but there's one conversation where what you've just told us is that everybody who came from IHOP, they were groomed to lead in this sort of way. And there was so much hero worship around Mike that when it came to here's how you do conflict, you just make it unbearable for people to be there. You never confront them directly about why you're disagreeing, because at the end of the day, your motives are actually concealed and you can make it look like your motives are pure when in reality, you're just trying to remove somebody. And then all of the leaders, they follow suit. And again, I'm watching this happen here in Denver. One of his disciples is doing the exact same tactics, just suddenly people aren't in a meeting and they don't even know why. Suddenly people are on a team and they don't know why. But then there's this other conversation over here where Mike has groomed the entire culture of IHOP. And so meanwhile, he's got this secret sin. And this grooming was intentional, because if these accusations ever came forward, here's how his people will rally to protect him. And they'll use the same phrases that have been used against me. Oh, I'm just being attacked by the accuser of the brethren. Or the black horse prophecy, right? And so then suddenly all three of you and your spouses, you find yourself the ones blowing the whistle. And now you know if Mike is unrepentant, it is all out civil war, because he's groomed everybody to treat you as though you're the accuser of the brethren because you brought forward an allegation. What was that like for you? Yeah, who wants to go first on that?
I'll go. It was because I was kind of the first with my neck out there because it started in 2021 for us with the affair that his son was having with a friend of ours. And so that's when it started. And the way that Mike dealt with it and other leaders was to discredit us, was one of the most important things. And so a narrative was seeded about me and my husband, but I was the more, because I had been on staff, and on the board of directors, I was a little bit more vocal. So this narrative was seeded. Elizabeth's an exaggerate. She kind of exaggerates, and she's operating there. She's divisive and gossiping. People think, oh, Elizabeth exaggerates. She's divisive. I mean, it's a big deal, right? We have many people in our lives that we've never had a single negative anything with. They refuse to sit and meet with us. Just please, can we sit together and ask questions and answer questions and have a meeting of the hearts? They won't even sit across from us. So it has the loss is at a magnitude that's It's kind of indescribable. It's the only, it's not woe is us, but I'm just saying this is the cost for being courageous. This is the cost. And the community, the only community my children have ever known is gone. The only church they have ever gone to is gone. I mean,
isolation.
take that in. That's enormous. The isolation. Yeah, we've gotten them out to a school far away. We're letting them rebond. But it's been, so the loss is huge. A lot of people knew what was going on, at a certain point, but what was lacking, and kind of, this is something that the man who was suffering, said himself. He said, what was lacking was courage. People knew, even male leaders knew, a couple of them knew. And I don't know. I'm me. I don't know. I'm redhead, and I just couldn't bear it. And courage rose up in me. Was it the Holy Spirit? I'm sure everybody at IHOP believes that it's a divisive demonic spirit. I believe that it was the Holy Spirit that allowed me and my husband and a couple of others to take this on and not give up. And Mike wrote us off. He wouldn't meet with us. He sent an email saying, I don't need to do Matthew 18 with you. I have released you to the Lord. And because we're begging for him to meet with us. And when I received that email, all I could think was, oh my gosh, me and Ernie Gruen. That's it. Who does Mike hate on the earth? Is Mike at odds with on the earth? It's literally just me and Ernie Gruen. I mean, it was horrible. Jen, you probably remember that day. I couldn't breathe. I was just having like a panic attack. Jen and Dwayne show up at the door, and it's your whole being has been unearthed to experience that kind of rejection from someone that, well, in my case also, that I had idolized. And I have to own that. Anyways, I'm saying too much, but the effects were devastating, and still are. They still are devastating.
Sorry.
Yeah, I would echo all of that. It's humiliating, it's shocking, it's painful that all of a sudden ones that were dearly loved are the enemy. Dwayne and I had a benefit because when we moved to Brazil, we were celebrated and sent off like heroes, because we weren't going to a different city. Going to a different country was like awesome. They could celebrate us and we weren't a threat. Other people didn't get that. We got the good vibe.
Hear what you just said. I'm sorry, but take note of what you just said. You're a hero if you leave the country. That's how far you have to go for you to actually leave with a reputation.
It's a good point, but it's actually true. It's actually true. So we left the country, we celebrated like heroes, maintained good relationship all those years. Even when we moved back to Kansas City, Dwayne and I would say, we're not going to join IHOP. We can love it, but we're not going to enter into that dysfunction anymore. And we would say it's like an adult child moving back in. Why do you do that? You've already owned your own home. You have your own children. You don't move back into your father's house. And so we let Mike know, even Mike, Stuart, and Isaac, hey, we're moving to Kansas City. We're planting a house church. We love you guys. We're going to go to the prayer room. It's going to be great. Praise God. Love you. Awesome. This is great. This is great. So the day that we started our house church, Dwayne met with Mike, and he's all in, super excited about it. And says, hey, I want you to come to staff meetings. Anything you want to come to, you sit on the front row. Anytime you want a microphone, you just walk right up on that platform. You grab the microphone. You are always family to us. You're a father in this house. You're a founder. Your voice matters. We love you. It was really beautiful. And it was like, awesome. Okay, great. So the fact that happened, that was his posture. People, I felt, loved us. It felt like family to us in Kansas City. We'd come back from Brazil once a year. We didn't go to my home state. We didn't go to Canada where Dwayne's from. We came to Kansas City. This felt like home to us. So to have people that you thought knew you, loved you, and championed you turn on you and give a narrative that you're divisive, that your desire is to take over IHOP, that it was to build this church, and that you're a disgruntled employee. It was shocking. I'm still processing the grief of that. I don't even think I fully touched it, because some of my dearest friends are still there. Some haven't communicated with me since October. Others are, we need to get a mediator because it's too painful to talk. And that's fine. We'll do that. I want to preserve as much relationship as I can, but it's just shocking. We thought doing the right thing would produce godly results, and it has not. We did not know at the time Mike was the predator that he is. I didn't have the full picture yet. I didn't have the full understanding of how much grooming I had been under. It has taken such a severe blow to the head to wake me up to see what I was a part of. And actually, now this will cause people to hate me, I think the prayer room is an idol. I do. It's an idol. And faithfulness was the language used to keep everyone there. And now it's the language used. And as the community gets smaller and smaller and smaller, now they're the most faithful. This is Gideon's army. They're being fed these lines to keep them there. And they forget that Jesus is actually coming back for a bride, not a prayer ministry. And somehow this prayer ministry has trumped everything else that he's doing in the globe. And it now turns my stomach. That place I used to love so much, it turns my stomach.
You just said something that I remember reading this when a narcissist comes to church. I'm sure people have recommended it to you after everything you've gone through. But one of the things he points out is how when you're dealing with a narcissist and you're trying to confront them, it's never the response of everybody in the community led by that narcissist, because it's a narcissistic community, not just a narcissist leading it. But the response of people is not the allegations you're bringing forward. They never give attention to that. What they give attention to is whether you brought the allegations forward in a way they saw as God honoring. And so forget what the person did, right? They're not the problem. You're the problem for how you brought forward the accusation of what that person did. And so this is the easiest way to commit Darvo, to put it back on those who were brave enough to have the courage enough to do the godly thing by exposing sin. You're the problem for exposing sin, not the sinner for committing sin. You're the problem for exposing the predator, not the predator for his predatorial actions.
Yeah, so it's like,
exactly right.
Let me assault this 14-year-old girl, and this person's like talking about how I'm an abuser. They didn't do it the right channel. Like, which one's worse, guys? Like, let's just weigh that for a second. Also, for people who, I mean, I'm not here. I don't know Jennifer personally, but for those of you who are out there who are like, let's keep this myth alive that they're trying to take over IHOP. You know how you don't take over a mega church international movement? You don't try to take it over with a house church. Okay, like let's be reasonable here. Let me just,
nobody's trying to grow something big by being in a house.
Yeah. Like, that's just a thing. Like, they were trying to take over IHOP and they're trying to destroy us. Like, you know what you don't do? You don't start a house church. That's what you don't do. For people who've been acclimated to, a worship team that's larger than your house church, and they're used to lights and smoke screens. You don't like, hey guys, let's break bread in this house and have a potluck and talk about Jesus. It's just what you don't do. So I think that's a foolish accusation. If anyone's holding on to that, I think that's silly. Shari, would you tell us some of your story? Same kind of vein of how that caused you to feel, being on one side of the inside group and now being on the outside group and being kind of gaslit.
Yeah, I mean, really, it's been painful realizing a lot of people that you thought you were really close with had a huge side you didn't realize, and just going, okay, like just reassessing your relationships, really, of like going, oh gosh, what else could I have done? What else could I have how else could I have been in friendship with this person? So, there's that aspect for sure, of going like, oh my gosh, like you suddenly feel like you're in a movie where you thought you were in one storyline and suddenly it's a whole nother storyline. And you're like, what did I miss in the middle of that?
Yeah.
What plot points did I misinterpret? And just really taking the time to reassess. And then, as both Jennifer and Elizabeth have said, just taking the time to reflect and saying, what role was I in this story? And what do I need to own? So there's just that's a lot. It's a lot to process at the same time while processing everything else. And then the relationships in your life where you have people constantly attacking you. You have people telling you what you're doing is wrong. And then for me, one of the most painful parts was just people that said they were friends outside of IHOP. It's one thing when you realize the community you're in was not what you thought it was, but then when you have all those around the community suddenly start attacking you, that personally was very painful for us when there was like a leader in the church that you go to for help as an independent party and they start attacking you. Like my husband was on a call for 40 minutes with this leader in the church, just not really listening to him, just attacking him, assuming like you have to be wrong. And so there's just a lot of different things to process. And of course, we've all lost friendships. We've had people unfriend us. We've had people turn on us. But, at the same time, I also realize I am not what I've experienced is so much less than so many others. And so I'm always like,
it doesn't make it,
no,
it doesn't make it better. Like
yeah,
you can't diminish your own pain.
Process, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And then you realize we've been removed for 5 years. We left about 5 years ago. And what's interesting when we left, there was a lot of things. My husband eventually, ironically, he was fired quite a few times, but never fully exited because people are like, oh, I thought he was fired. Yes, but it was always like Mike somehow always became the hero of those stories because it was never Mike directly firing him. So then you always would then go and appeal to Mike. And somehow, he would make it about your character, but then somehow he would make a way to save the day. So, through it all, somehow my husband ended up becoming the chief operating officer. So I think that was when I remember when he took the job, he was like, okay, if this doesn't work, we're going to be out of here because, we saw so much dysfunction and we kept thinking it was this person or that person, or if we could just change this one little thing in the system, everything would be better. So when he took that role with the intention of making the system finally work. And so he tried his darndest to do that, and really kind of did a full analysis of everything. But then it always just came back to, oh, wait, but Mike is just, actually, we started to see that Mike was the source of the dysfunction as he went through that process. And then as we started to poke at that, we were just like, okay, wait, we can't actually be on a leadership team here because we can't answer for these things. And now we're in the position where it looks like we should have the authority to change them, but we can't. So that was kind of there was a whole series of events that led us to realize that. And so we scheduled a meeting with Mike. We took a week to just really pray and fast and ask God to either show us how to exist in that community or open a door for us to leave. And there was a door that opened for us that week. And so we took it seriously because that was the week we had taken. And it was really out of the blue, to be honest, because we had really sought the Lord that week. We took it seriously. And I remember when we first went and checked out the opportunity and then decided that, yes, we do think this is where God's moving us. And so the thing that was most hurtful was when Jono told Mike, like, he didn't want to discuss it at all. His first, like, he had the hardest time. Granted, Jono was constantly in meetings, one-on-one with Mike, board meetings, like meetings upon meetings. Suddenly Mike did not want to meet with him. He could sense something was up. And then Jono kind of cornered him in a hallway and was like, I need to talk to you about this. And he's like, his first reaction was, how much money did they offer you? Well, I hope it's a good deal. I'm going to get a good deal for you. And it was just like, what? Like, this guy, you're supposed to be our pastor. And like, we wanted to discuss this with you. We want to discuss like what you see in us, like what, if this makes sense, we thought you would fight for us to stay here. But there was none of that. And so I remember I actually wrote Mike an email about how that was hurtful. And so then he finally scheduled a meeting with both of us. And we tried to bring up the issues that we saw that were leading us to actually have that week to pray and ask God how to function there. And he goes, he stopped us and said, I don't want to hear it. And he said, did God call you to leave? And he says, is this of God, this opportunity? And we said, well, we believe it is. And he goes, well, then that's all that matters. He goes, God's leading you there. So this meeting is not about discussing my issues. This is about like blessing and releasing you. And if God's called you, that's the end of the story. And that was basically—
So spiritualize it and dismiss.
You can control the narrative. Oh, God's just calling them in another direction. When realistically, there's a bunch of underlying problems.
God's kicking you out of the nest.
Oh boy, I've heard that one before.
We saw it over and over and over. You know, when people had this intense pressure to have these huge God stories to leave the community, like, you know, you had to have a dream, prophetic words, like this whole thing of like, God has opened this door, and, you know, like, and have this whole like kind of tale of why you were leaving, and it had to be spiritualized. So then it put this pressure, I think, on a lot of people to have that, and not just simply because if you just left, you were giving up, you know, because when you do have a life of prayer where it's about like, we're fighting for this, we are pressing into these promises, it was always, the narrative was always that, oh, you're giving up on that.
So Shari, what you just said is, it's not that really you needed that God story. It's that Mike needed that God story, because that made the narrative palatable for everybody in the organization. Jono was called by God to go here, and we're going to celebrate that. Dwayne was called by God to go here, so we're going to celebrate that. Elizabeth was called by God to go here, so we're going to celebrate that. It's right. Mike that needed that narrative, and it was how he kept the whole organization going, instead of the narrative of, hey, this is dysfunctional, and I feel like you're at the center of the problem, and we can't operate successfully. Like, we're going to go down with your ship because you're not willing to change. Like, he can't hear that.
But then also, you have a revolving door of people every semester, you know, to sign pledges to go join the prayer movement, students to come join the school of ministry. There's no shortage of people. So you are legitimately expendable in that you can come here for 2 years. If you're, you know, super important to Mike or the organization as a whole, you can be hand selected to be brought into the inner courts, if you will. But then other people are going to leave because that's what they do, right? This is basically a missions organization where we sign up, we get support, we come in for a couple of years, then we leave, and it creates a system of this revolving door, so no one feels when someone leaves, because people are always leaving. They're constantly coming in and out. In fact, you know, there was a young lady, a couple of years ago who had confided in us some experiences that she had at IHOP, and I believed her story, that it was a horribly abusive experience. It hurt her, that kind of thing. But I was able to kind of justify that, knowing the turnover rate at IHOP, knowing that, well, they have all these student leaders that come in that, you know, sign up for, 2 years. Year 1, they're in there praying. Year 2, they're in leadership. By year 4, they're gone. Or, if even then, maybe year 3, they're gone, So there's constant this turnover rate. So yeah, you're going to get bad apples in there, but that it's not representative of the whole leadership structure. It's just the way that they've structured, and it's not a good structure. I would acknowledge that it's not a good structure, but I would ask questions like, well, is Mike involved in this? And was Stuart involved in that? And I could make sense of how it worked because I had guys that I trusted. I had Sam Storms and I had, Francis Chan. I had these guys that were kind of in orbit around IHOP giving the stamp of approval. And it was easy to kind of justify and look past, some of the stories of pain. So anyway, Miller.
Josh, I'd like to get some closing thoughts. We're at the end of our time here. And I think each of you have you had your own reason for coming on here. And I hope that we were a means to fulfill that hope for you. If there's one thing you want people either in IHOP, people outside of IHOP, or just people in general to know, tell us what that is. And then I've got one closing thought that I think will be an important little bow on this. Who wants to go first?
I'll go. I think I would like to talk to the 16,000 people that have passed through the International House of Prayer. And I think about the pain that many of them have experienced and the projection that got put on the Lord as if he were the one that treated them that way. And I know many have actually walked away from their faith because of their experiences at IHOP. And my hope is that they'll see that the pain, the dysfunction, the grooming wasn't the Lord at all. It wasn't the Lord at all. And if they could return back to the place of just actually looking at God and not the organization that quote unquote represented him, because I just care that they could return and find peace with God and not that IHOP wouldn't be the representative of the Lord, because I don't think IHOP always represented the Lord well. I didn't always represent the Lord well. The leadership didn't. And so my appeal to them is search out who God is again and erase all the experiences, if you can, that you experienced at IHOP and thought that that was the Lord, because I don't think it was the Lord.
That's good. Shari, I'll toss it over to you.
Yeah, I guess right now I'm hearing a lot of people just talking about like, you guys are just attacking prayer and like how in such a time in history, don't you see that you're pulling down prayer and we need it more than ever? And I think that's kind of mixing up conversations of going, yes, there's the concept of prayer, but then there's the methodology and the people actually praying and the lifestyle of those doing the praying. And I think there's been this like just such a push with this prayer movement mandate that has been messaged for the last, 20 some odd years, that is so hard for people to kind of parse out the good parts and the bad parts. And I guess I'm just asking everyone to stop and ask the questions of like, how do we actually pray in the way that God has commanded us in scriptures? How do we do it holistically? How do we care about the lives of those actually involved? Corporate prayer is definitely needed and a thing, and nobody here is downplaying the role of prayer in the scriptures. I just think like to just say we're attacking prayer is missing the overall point that we're saying the lifestyles of those that were in specifically IHOP was not holistic. And a lot of it was actually people were living lifestyles that actually God says he doesn't hear your prayers if you do these things. So I guess that would be, and don't give up on the church would be my other parting thought.
Something you are fighting to do, right, Shari?
Yes. Yes. Don't give up on prayer.
Elizabeth, kind of a closing thought.
Mhm. Yeah, I guess we'll try and cover everybody here. My heart is heavy for all the people that I love, and even the people that I don't know. There's lots that I don't know now that are still either IHOP KC staff or in the community, and I want to appeal to everyone watching from the outside to I'm not saying not to speak strongly about things that are true, but I do want to appeal for gentleness as people unravel this extraordinary wound of trust. And to those that are still inside, I want you to know that I know how you feel. I think that because of the narrative that's been seeded about the advocacy group as well, there's a thought that we are very different from you and don't know how you feel, and it's not true. We know what it feels like, and we know. I shared in a different interview the levels of trauma that were scream wailing is the only thing that I could do when I started to realize Mike is not who he said he was. Oh my gosh. As I found out about the abuse of the women, I started to pull my hair out, and I still have spots that are bald. And that's such a vulnerable thing to say, but I, with my whole heart, want those faithful ones. I can see faces of the worship leaders, and they've even gotten public, castigation for standing. And I want to ask everyone to remember the levels of trauma that they are in. They loved Mike. They thought the same as we did, that he was true and he was called, all these things. And so while we press for exposure, I also want us to press for grace for our beloved brothers and sisters that are doing their best. Most of them are doing their best right now. And also remember that the narrative has been very narrow inside the organization. Remember that at the beginning, they were asked to not be on social media. They were told that we had a wicked and twisted narrative. Of course they believe that. I believed what Mike told me, right? So I just want us to I want us to be the body for our brothers and sisters and not be us against them, and don't mock, don't make fun. Please. I want us to embrace every single one as they come in their sacred process, because it's going to be for life. This is for life. And so we don't want to interrupt that and make it, I don't know. I know that I might get hit for not just saying, you guys are a bunch of crazies, get out. But that's not going to help anybody. It's not going to help anybody. And so that's what I want. My heart is for the people that are still tied. And I want you to know that I love you. And it was worth it. It was worth it even if you never speak to me again. Even if you hate me and call me a gossiper and a divider. It was worth ending Mike's terror and his abusive reign on the lives that we know. The stories you know are this much compared to what's out there. And it was worth it. And we will take the hits, but I just want you to know that we love you. We're not against you, we're for you.
Elizabeth, it's hard to follow that statement. I think something that's important to note here is so many of the women on this video and the men in the previous one, they made a willing decision to go public about a predator and about the toxic nature of an organization on the front end, knowing that they were going to be discredited, knowing that they were going to be blamed, knowing that they were going to be slandered, and they did it anyways. Mike made himself out to be the hero. He was at the center of all of it. This man who was predatorial was the hero for everybody, and they all followed him, and they were all groomed by him. And they did it not knowing. I mean, it's just, there's a lot of naivety when it comes to the behaviors of a narcissistic predator. A narcissistic predator will prey on people's naivety, prey on their innocence, and prey on their purity to use them to do what he wants. And so when I think about the true hero of this story, it's not Mike Bickle, obviously. We know that. But what people are still yet failing to see, which I hope I can appeal to you now to see, is the heroes of this story are the ones who had the courage to knowingly face slander, discreditation, and isolation, and still go public with this information. The women in this conversation were the first ones to hear the allegations of sexual predation and believe the stories of the victims and come forward. The heroes of this story are the Tammy Wood and the other Jane Does who were brave enough to speak out. And the heroes of the story are on this call with us now and did the video we did previously. Those are the heroes. And it's about time we start to recognize the true heroes of these stories, because it's not the narcissistic abuser, and it's not the organization, and it wasn't his vision. So that's my thoughts. Closing thoughts.
I'll close up with just saying that if the prayer movement is all about Mike Bickle and IHOP, it should die anyway. So the prayer movement I don't think is about IHOP, and I don't think it is about Mike Bickle. If prayer is something that God has given his church so that we can roll our burdens upon him, and that we can build a relationship with the Lord, and we can seek the Lord while he may be found. If we have these kinds of interactions, if prayer is something that God has blessed the whole church with, then exposing Mike Bickle and exposing IHOP for the things that they've done is not going to destroy the prayer movement. If it was installed by God, it's not going to be destroyed. So I wouldn't conflate these two things as, okay, well, yes, IHOP has really been at the tip of the spear with a lot of this, but I think we're kind of showing that IHOP has also been at the tip of the spear for a lot of abuse, and that needs to be cleaned out. That wound, as painful as it is, needs to be lanced so that the infection can leave, so that real healing can take place. But I think what people are conflating is the pain of lancing that wound as an attack. No, there's an infection, and it's killing the body, and it's hurting the sheep. And any shepherd worth their salt is going to go through whatever necessary pain it's going to take to lance that wound and cause the necessary pain to take place so that healing can emerge in its stead. So thankful for you guys. Really appreciate you coming on the program and talking through all this with us. For those of you who are watching right now, thank you for sticking tuned through this whole process. We have more content coming up in a kind of similar vein coming out soon. So thank you so much.